Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Byrd, and I am the director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy at City University of Seattle. And I am really pleased and excited to be able to offer today's program. First, a little bit about Sanford. We are, and I kid you not, an institute that I get paid to teach people how to raise money. Our mission is to support the nonprofit sector by offering fundraising training to working professionals in the field, generally free of charge. Often there may be a low charge, but nothing big. And I'm mobile, so I do this all over the state of Washington. And this really isn't about me so much as it is about Sanford's wish to support the nonprofit sector, our major donor, Denny Sanford, by creating these institutes, which are all over the country. So we are at City University and thrilled to be able to offer you programming online and in person when the times are different, around year-round. A little bit more about me. I had a fundraising career myself of nearly 20 years, mostly in the arts. I've been teaching adults at the graduate and master's level since 2013, and I have a couple degrees that were very expensive, and I've published and written about fundraising as well. And I just love this because I've been on your side of the table, and it's so great to be able to get out there and offer this to people who may not have a professional development budget or may not be able to get here because they're in Yakima or Forks, Washington, and are able to tune in online. So that's what I'm all about. And I want to also talk a little bit about August being Black Philanthropy Month. Okay, and I want to share some information about it straight from their website. And this is observed every August as a global celebration of Black philanthropy and a concerted campaign to elevate African descent giving. Since it was established, Black Philanthropy Month has reached about 17 million people, which is really awesome, and become an increasingly year-round initiative that illuminates the ingenuity and transformative impact of generosity in Black communities. And their aims are informing, involving, inspiring, and investing in Black philanthropic leadership to strengthen African American and African descent giving in all its forms for the benefit of our planet, our communities, our organizations, and our lives. So what's today's takeaway for those 32 of us, 35 of us participating? Well, I don't think I need to hard sell you that understanding Black philanthropy, and in this case, a new fund created to address the challenges and systemic racism the Black community faces, is important for fundraisers and philanthropists alike. Why is that? According to a study by the Kellogg Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, African American donors give away 25% more of their incomes than do Caucasian donors. And this same study found that African American donors contribute over $11 billion a year to various causes nationwide. Today's SIP, which we're affectionately called, is honored to welcome 3 of the 4 architects of the Black Future Co-op Fund, initiated just this June, 2 months ago, by our guests and Angela Jones, CEO of Washington STEM, who was unable to join us but sends her best wishes. I'm pleased to welcome Andrea Caupain, who's the CEO of Byrd Barr Place, Michelle Merriweather, President and CEO of Urban League, of Metropolitan Seattle, and Tawana Nobles, President and CEO of Tacoma Urban League. They are both, as you can probably figured from their titles alone, fundraisers and philanthropists in the Black community. And why don't we get started hearing about this fund by asking them to talk about themselves. If you could each introduce yourselves, architects, and share how you came to your career path.
Sure, this is Tawana. I can get us started. Hi, everyone. I am riding up to Seattle for our next Black Future Co-op Fund event or opportunity, and I am just excited to be here with you today. I'm, as we mentioned, President and CEO of Tacoma Urban League and have been in that position for 3 years now. I was in education before. I taught at Lincoln High School 3 years ago, and then for 1 year, and then at Stadium High School, both here in Tacoma. I taught at Stadium for 4 years. But I became the president and CEO because the previous CEO was running for mayor and the position was open. And she also happened to be my mentor. When she ran her first city council race, I was her campaign manager and then managed her campaign for her reelection race. So we had formed this relationship. She watched me start my own business. She watched me, and mentored me as I ran for school board here in University Place. And now I'm, serving my 5th year as a school board director. So it really came down to strong mentorship. And I had spent many years supporting the Urban League as a contractor in fundraising and helping with their girls program. But she said, she told me that she felt like I was the right person to take the Urban League to the next level, and that she wants to recommend, or she wanted to recommend to the board that they consider me. And so they did. And 3 years later, we have significantly grown the organization's budget, obviously by increasing fundraising and relationships and partnerships, and increased our program portfolio in the ways that we help the community. Michelle will, I'm sure, share something similar, but Urban Leagues across the nation, there are 90 affiliates. We support the community in the areas of housing, healthcare, education, employment, and then we are fighting for justice year round. So it's really important work, and I'm happy to be at the helm of Tacoma Urban League's leadership.
They're lucky to have you. Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Andrea Caupain, pleasure to be with you today. And I have to say, given that we're in this with the Urban League, I'm with Byrd Barr Place, a social service nonprofit in Seattle. Byrd Barr Place, a historically Black organization, got our start at the Urban League. So the Urban League is sort of our big sister. We did not have our 501c3 designation yet, but we needed to bring in some funds to get the organization up and running. And we were physically at their location, the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, until we were able to get our own home. And also they supported us with funding and other capacity building efforts. So I must say that it is serendipitous that we are doing this work alongside the Urban League. Urban League, of course, is a lot older than we are. We're only 56 years old. And our organization was created during the Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty era, when you had the attention being brought, quite like today, of people living at the intersection between poverty and racism. And the Central District, where both the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and Byrd Barr Place is located, was a predominantly Black neighborhood because it was redlined. And so naturally, a majority of our clientele were Black. That shifted a little bit today, but we continue to look at the 311,000 Black Washingtonians across the state. And that essentially is what led me to this organization. Was I started out in the state legislature. I worked in the Washington State Senate. I worked in the House of Representatives, and then I went on to work for the governor's office and the Commission on African American Affairs, where I was for 4 years. And we tracked data and policy and systems and how it affected Black Washingtonians across the state. I learned about Byrd Barr Place while I was at the governor's office, did a lot of work in tandem with the governor's office in Byrd Barr Place. And it was time for me to transition to something different. And I got the opportunity to come here 17 years ago. So I've been here 17 years. My start in public service work is really a testament to my grandmother who raised me seeing her giving her life in service to others who weren't as fortunate as we were, even though we weren't doing very well ourselves. But she taught her grandchildren that you live your life in service to others, that it is the responsibility of those of us who have opportunities to do for those less fortunate. So that has led me on this path, and that's created this opportunity to be on the stage with Tawana and Michelle today. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
Great to be here, and as always, to share space with my fellow architects, my sisters, who, we've been going through this together for even before we started the fund, but that's how the fund happened so naturally. Again, my name is Michelle. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. The Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle celebrates 90 years this year. And unfortunately, COVID has sort of taken the celebration away from us, but definitely not the work. I got my start with the Urban League as a volunteer. I'm a native of Los Angeles, although I feel like I'm a native of Seattle. I've only been here 5 years, but it feels like 50, and I'm not even 50. But as a volunteer in Los Angeles, I started as a young professional, joined the board of the Urban League representing Starbucks, ironically. I was in business development with Starbucks before I joined the Urban League. And similar to Tawana, I had great mentors and friends that basically said, this is the work you're supposed to be doing. And you hear it enough, you start to believe it. And so I joined the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle team. I thought that I would move to Seattle at some point, but working for Starbucks. God had other plans. And so I joined the Urban League 5 years ago as the vice president. And I've been serving as the president and CEO, what's today, about 2.5 years now. And time is flying. Similar to Tawana and Andrea, we've had significant growth in the last few years. The Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle serves about 2,500 people directly, many more than that indirectly through education and information. And we definitely pride ourselves in being an incubator and fiscal agent for startup organizations. So we continue that legacy today that helped Byrd Barr get started. So I'm happy to be here with you all today.
We're just delighted to have the three of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm just going to put the question out there like we talked in our pre-show conference. How did the fund get started, and what are your plans for the it seems a little odd to ask about the future since it's only 2 or 3 months old, but how did you get going, and what are your plans?
Future looks bright, even though it's only 3 months in. We feel so hopeful. This is really a step towards true optimism for our community, because this is the first of its kind in Washington State. And what's really wonderful is that it's become a catalyst for other efforts across the nation. So we're getting calls from other foundations, other places wanting to learn, how did we do this? How did we go about this? Wanting to use some examples and follow our lead. And so I think that is encouraging, because it is time that we shift the table to allow our voices at these types of decision making. When you think about resourcing communities that have been economically segregated for so long, when you think about being able to make decisions and self-determine how we solve our issues, we have not had very many opportunities to do that. And so that really is the genesis of the creation of this fund, is to put ourselves at this table, right? And it came about because, as Michelle said, we've been in this work for so long that I think we've always been seeding this, even though necessarily we didn't arrive at the Black Future Co-op Fund in each of our specific areas of work. But it really galvanized after the killing of George Floyd, and seeing the devastating effects of COVID on our communities across the nation, not just the state of Washington. And it just organically came about that maybe it's time that we look at changing the paradigm now while people are deeply listening. One of the things that we looked at was, I'd say 5 years ago, only 30% of Americans believed that Black people needed better opportunities. Today it's 56%. And so what we know is that people are more deeply listening and wanting to take action. So we wanted to maximize that space to create opportunities for our community. And then there came the creation of the Black Future Co-op Fund.
And what is the Black Future Co-op Fund in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, it will be an incubator for the Black community to grow and to lead and have space at the table for philanthropy. We are creating this fund with the intention to support the 300,000 plus Black Washingtonians across the state to have the resources to be successful. We will make investments to Black-led organizations that are serving Black people across the state in the areas we believe are health, housing, workforce development, education, advocacy, arts, things that have systemically kept us oppressed as a community. And it is also, our hope is that this fund will also be one, a bridge to philanthropy, where I think we'll talk about it at some point, but less than 2% go directly to the Black community across the country. And so we wanted to be a bridge and help build relationship with organizations that are doing great work but are drastically under-resourced. And we also wanted to shift the power from philanthropy to community and to those that are doing great work with bare bones. So we'll strategically be supporting grassroots organizations within community. The decisions will not be made by the four of us on who gets funded, but by community. We will hear and lift the voices of the Black community in their needs and help elevate those to philanthropy. And again, expand that table so that more voices are heard and we start to begin that better alignment of power structure that has failed the Black community for so long. Again, we don't intend to be the magic fix all, but we are very passionate about this work and believe that this is a step in the right direction.
So this is a crowd of mostly fundraisers. And I think that I and many of them would be very curious to learn. In May, in June, did you sit down at a kitchen table, make a list of people you were going to call? How did that come about?
Angela, we bogarted this thing, right? We took some lessons from the activists, the young activists that were on the streets, and we saw that they were making their demands, and we felt that we need to make our demands too, like take a page from their book.
Good for you.
And what we saw is that we had these proximities to funders, and all of us have relationships with funders, and we felt, in the course of our everyday business, we have been learning about, philanthropy's desire, even before the killing of George Floyd, to shift the way they resource our communities. And so that was encouraging in itself. But again, with the effects of COVID and with the protesting and demonstrations in the streets, the renewed revolution for racial equity, we felt the time was now. So we stormed the steps of philanthropy. We said, we see what's possible when there's will. When you exercise a particular type of will, you're able to raise money and invest in certain things. We want you, all of those statements that you're plastering over your websites about how Black lives matter, well, this is a step in the movement for Black lives to help us raise $25 million in support of Black Washingtonians. And they said yes, and they said yes pretty quickly.
Fantastic.
I'll also add that I started this work as a volunteer, and so with the murder of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, I marched, and I was like, now that I'm in this position, what can I do with this, my voice and this power? And so that's kind of where this came from. I wholeheartedly admire and support and uplift those that were protesting, but I was like, I'm tired. I got to fight different this time and let them march, but meet them with the financial capacity and the will that I have. So that's how we got here.
Fantastic. Anything else to add before we go on to some of the more specific questions that I think our audience is going to benefit from?
Tawana, please chime in.
Tawana. I hope we haven't lost her.
I know, she may be en route.
Yeah, she might be en route. While she's joining, I will also say, COVID showed us what was possible in Washington State. The way that this community rallied together and raised money, it's been a few months, so I can't remember how much. It was something like $26 million in 48 hours. It was something amazing. It showed us what was possible, right? When we're all steering in the same direction and all care about the outcomes of those in our community, our friends and neighbors, and those that are less fortunate. And so we knew what was possible when we went to philanthropy. And so that I think that also helped get a quick yes. And I think she's having a little bit of a challenge, so she's in listen mode, but she'll chime in at some point, I'm sure.
So what challenges do you face in philanthropy, and how will the creation of this fund resolve those challenges?
You know, I'd say the means testing that organizations are put through to be deemed worthy of receiving a grant has been disadvantaging to our communities, our Black-led organizations, depending on, you know, the size of the organization, whether you're all volunteer-led or you have paid staff, your board, all of these things are used to test the credibility of your organization. Ours look different, but it doesn't mean our work is any less effective. And we also lacked, a lot of us, we talk about here today, us managing partners of this fund, we have enjoyed proximity to funders, but we also know that we have other sister and sibling organizations, Black-led organizations, that do not have that same proximity. And so this fund stands to change that. What we want to do is, we've been in discussion with Seattle Foundation about this. Rather than reporting back to funders about how our Black-led organizations are doing, we want to give an audience with funders and Black-led organizations who will be funded from this fund to be able to begin to build relationships. That's something that's been a challenge for our Black-led organizations, is being able to grow and build relationships with philanthropy. And we also want to change what capacity looks like and capability in our organizations. Again, your run-of-the-mill balance sheet, the ability to grow your organization staff and programming, they're very limited views as to the effectiveness of the work in our communities. So we want to change that paradigm as well.
Can I push you a little bit more on that, in that since I do interact with quite a few fundraisers of all levels of nonprofits, how is it different for organizations in the Black community as opposed to, say, just a small startup, scrappy little nonprofit that doesn't have all the capacity that some of the larger guys do?
So for instance, people are always shocked to hear that Byrd Barr Place is only 18 staffers. We're a $5 million organization, but yet we serve 18,000 individuals every year.
Okay.
Right? And so how we do that is not just our paid staff, but we're able to work with volunteers as a volunteer-led organization through community residents, but also through board relationships. But we're also able to utilize the support of clients who we serve. So clients who come to us for rental assistance, for home repair, for food, to also support their neighbors through utilizing the services of our organization. And so those things oftentimes are not captured in stories and metrics that we need to tell funders, right? When we think about the theory of change in itself, when organizations are made to sort of structure what you do in a theory of change, we do two bodies of work. We're interdisciplinary. And so we provide basic safety net services to anyone living at or below the poverty line. But we also, through community engagement, are wanting to move the needle forward in a positive direction for all Black Washingtonians. We do that through gathering qualitative and quantitative data. We share that data with other Black-led organizations and organizations that serve Black communities. But we also do the program design from a participant-centered place. We do many feedback loops with the people who stand to benefit from our services. They participate in designing our programs. They participate in evaluating our programs. Those are the sorts of things that we don't get to tell the story about, you know, in your run-of-the-mill grant report, right? There are anecdotal stories that sometimes get heard, but when you think of like metrics that are built around scales and numbers, they miss the type of work we're doing, the approach, right? We put the human being first, the well-being of people first. And so oftentimes that doesn't get valued in those types of metrics.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, why is healing or repair work an important component of your fund? And maybe you could describe what that is. I'm intrigued by this question, but don't exactly know how to conceptualize healing philanthropy. So please.
Yeah, Michelle touched on it earlier when she said this fund is also, it's not just to distribute money, but it's a bridge. It's building a bridge. We also want to build a bridge within our Black community, right? There are 311,000 of us across the state of Washington. Yes, the majority of us do live in King County, 49%. The next largest is Pearson and Snohomish. But we also know that we're in Eastern Washington, and we're as far as Vancouver and Whatcom County. And so we have had Black communities and Black-led organizations in those communities who have felt left out. We're a prosperous region. And yes, even though very little resources come to our organizations, when they do come to our organizations, they're centered in Snohomish, Pierce, and King County. We want to ensure that our Black-led organizations across the state are resourced, but networked. In order to do that, we have to build coalition, because only then can we build power in numbers to truly bring about change in a systems way. What we've also found is that there is a need to align our Black communities better. So what we're talking about healing and repair is intra-community within our Black communities. There is 300 years of ancestral trauma that lives in our bodies, that lives in our minds and our spirits. And so we need to be able to acknowledge that and create healing spaces for our people. Spaces like this where we get to tell our stories can be seen as healing. Also spaces without white people. Oftentimes we know that when Black people and people of color are in spaces with white people, we do what's called racial caping, which is we practice white comfort. Why is that? That stems from years, again, 300 years of ancestral trauma. When you were a slave, if the white person wasn't comfortable, your master, you were killed or lynched or raped, right? In Jim Crow, you were lynched, you lost your job, your means of taking care of your family. Today, you could lose your stature. So there's still a level of organizing ourselves in ways in white spaces to make white people comfortable. And so being able to repair and heal from years of trauma, generational trauma, but also these experiences of being oppressed every day in a world that don't see us as human, every day in a world that sees us as only worthy of the crumbs that are falling off of the white dominant society table. So we do need to do that work in order to better network our communities, in order to build power in numbers. And I know that was a lot of heavy stuff in a short period of time, but happy to come back and talk about that segment.
No problem. I think our folks can handle it. We have a question that an audience member asked if the funders could be identified. Good for you. I'm going to answer that myself by telling you that the Seattle Foundation is administering the funds, I believe, and there's a very long post that I will find the link for and post in the chat that will take you to the very impressive list of funders, both corporate, foundation, and many individuals who are supporting this fund and this work. Austin, was that the only question? I saw the Q&A box lit up too.
Yeah, that was the only question so far. And if you'd like, I can grab the info off of the Black Co-op Funds page and sort of paste it into the chat box.
Sure.
If people would find that useful.
That'd be great. Thank you.
What you'll also find too, Angela, in that list and for the audience is that it's not just that we've appealed to white dominant philanthropy, but we've also been appealing to Black philanthropists. And we also want our community to have skin in the game. So you'll see that that list is populated not just with wealthy white folks, but also Black folks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did notice a few. Having been around the block more than once, it was like, yay. Another question that there was about the impact of colleges and universities on the culture of philanthropy. And I would love to know why this question is being asked, because I know that you have something you want to bring out with it, and then hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, because we've known that, I mean, at least it's as we deconstruct systems that have been oppressive for people of color, we're beginning to understand their roots. And so one of the roots of philanthropy can be traced back to not just for-profit corporations and financial institutions, but universities and colleges, right? Universities in particular value knowledge, this idea that knowledge has been transferred to now nonprofit effectiveness, right? Being evaluated, doing research and analytical thinking. All of those things have now been embedded in how funders evaluate nonprofit organizations and our effectiveness. And there are times where we're hampered by those processes because there's a sense of urgency around the services we need to provide. There's a sense of urgency around the issues that we need to solve. And so being able to extricate when that's needed, I do value research, I do value evaluation, but it is not always useful in the types of services that we're creating for our communities. And so I say, do your history and understand how things have been linked. I tell people, and this is more part of a larger conversation, Angela, but the United States' greatest ability it has is the ability to forget, right? Forget land theft, forget genocide, forget slavery. And we have forgotten with which these systems we participate and perpetuate today, how they're rooted in that past and how they can be disadvantaging to the work that we do today.
Yes. What did I read recently? The Decolonization of Wealth, which I'm trying to educate myself. And that just, even at 56, I can still have the whole tabula rasa and start all over fresh, because between that and white fragility, I've learned tremendously, shall we say. And the philanthropy, of which I grew up thinking was a good thing, and fundraising in the ES traditional way, now my thinking is all turned around on it. So thanks for that. I appreciate it.
And I'll say this to you and to everyone else that's listening who feel that way. It is a journey, right? This work is not a destination, even for Black people. Like there's our own internalized work that we need to do. We also perpetuate some of those practices. They're called poison cookies. We do hand them down generationally. And we have to understand from whence they came. But you will die not having arrived at this work because it is so deeply dimensional.
That's a little discouraging, but I believe you and accept it. We have a question in the box. I'm just going to read it out. How do you measure impact in those communities you've served?
I do it in particular. Each of us, we have different programs. So I say when we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're at the very bottom of the pyramid, right? Your basic shelter, food, warming those homes. And where our services end, the Urban League begins. And what we make up together is this road to economic mobility for Black Washingtonians. So what Michelle and Tawana will look at as a hallmark for success in evaluating an effective program is different from what I might look at. And so for me, I am always centering what the people say they want in how we create our programs. And through that feedback loop, if they're saying we got what we asked for and we were able to achieve these things that we wanted, then that's effectiveness. That is what I am pushing for. 63% of my budget is funded by the federal government. And I am pushing for them to allow me to be able to tell those stories, to be flexible on what those metrics look like, so that folks understand that our community is being adequately served, is being effectively served. Now, there's a resourcing issue, resourcing our organizations to continue to do that work and meet the growing needs. But it is important for us that our clients have a say in how we provide services, because they are the ones who stand to benefit the most from the services that we provide.
Michelle, anything to add? Because I have one more question, and I
can't overstate that or overemphasize that enough. It is imperative that those that we serve have a voice in the work that we do. We say from the time we opened our doors 90 years ago, we serve every client in the way that they need us to individually. We don't program them to death. Our goal is for them to be on a path to wealth and self-sufficiency. And that is the way they see it, not the way we see it for them. So everyone we serve may be a little different. And of course, we have to check the boxes and record the data as our funders see fit. Most of our funding comes from not the federal government, but the local government. Some of that by way of the federal government, of course. But so we have to make sure that we're tracking the data that they need. But for us, it's so much more than that, because, you know, for example, one of our funders says, as long as you get them a job, you cool, right? But how can we get a person a job that doesn't have a roof over their head, that doesn't have a resume? What if that job doesn't adequately support them and their families? So it's so much more than just getting them a job, right? And so for us, it is staying with them and serving them in the way that they need to be served so that their needs are met.
Yeah, Michelle is right. And I think I should use an example for the person who asked the question. For us, we had a elderly Black woman who came in for food bank services. And because it is government funded, that particular program, I can only give her 1 bag of food per week. So I have to raise private funds to ensure she gets what she needs if 1 bag isn't enough. Exactly. And the reason that she raised to me that it was not enough, the quantity was enough, but she was living with her son who is disabled, and he, yes, can get a bag too. But because he wasn't on her, sort of like on her household information when she initially came to us, she said, I'd like a mix of food because my son can't eat what I eat. I am a cancer patient, therefore, here are some things that I need. But because we categorized her entire household based on her needs, we couldn't give her son what he needed. She had a very restrictive diet because she was on chemo. He didn't. And so we now used our private funding to be able to get that entire household, whatever it is they needed. We also buy grocery store gift cards to distribute to clients for them to be able to have the autonomy to shop for what they need rather than be limited by what our food bank provides. I don't get to report that in my metrics on my contract reporting.
Thank you for that. We are coming up on 12:40, and so that means it's time for us to open up to the audience for your questions. So please type in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Anything you'd like to know more about this fund, about philanthropy in the Black community, fundraising in the Black community, dare I put out there, because we've got 3 experts right here, right? I'm so curious about what you've had to say about evaluation, because I do teach as part of the Sanford curriculum some grant writing, and naturally part of that has to be, how are you going to explain your success to funders? And we do the box checking, and I kind of go through an exercise with the students about outputs versus outcomes, and I try to, at the best of my ability, say, well, and one outcome of one of your services might be that you want your clients to be able to eat healthily today, so that 5 years from now they aren't hospitalized for some disease that came from a nutritional deficiency. But then again, I am setting that as an example. I am setting that goal for them. I am saying our goal for our clients is that they don't end up hospitalized in 5 years. What would you offer as an alternative to that for my fictitious example, and one that you work with every day for real?
Well, I'd say, how about more feedback loops with the funders? I think this needs to change to be more relational. We have a very similar relationship with the Northwest Area Foundation, where rather than waiting an entire year or 6 months to do a written report, we agree that we actually don't know how we're going to go about this work yet, because we haven't reached out to communities yet. But what we know is that we want to change food insecurity. Let's say food, since you raised it, food insecurity for the Black community. We also know we're going to build this plane as we're flying it, Northwest Area Foundation. Are you in this with us? So it's not just about sending us a check and coming back and checking in a year later, 6 months later through a written grant report, but it's, how is it going? what other technical assistance or capacity can we help you build to ensure that food insecurity is solved with Black Washingtonians? And so they gave us the grace and the space, like slow, patient funding, to be able to go out to community. We presented the data here, Black Washingtonians. We know that the average life expectancy in Washington state is 80 years. For a Black Washingtonian, it's 76. We know that 15 years leading up to our death, we lose our quality of life. Yes, we know that there are policy and systems change that need to be made around the healthcare industry and access to quality healthcare, but we also want to put some power in your hands, give you the autonomy to be able to control your health outcomes. So what does that look like for you, Black community? Because we know in King County, it might be different than a coastal area or a rural area or suburban. What an urban Black person is faced with around food insecurity and health may be different from what someone is faced with in Okanagan County. And so being able to have the space to understand what each Black community is faced with, and then being able to build the plan with them, and then coming back to the funder, but not waiting until we get that information to then do the grant proposal, to then have the evaluation plan.
Sure.
That sets our community back.
Michelle, you're nodding. Would you have anything to add?
I think that the challenge that we have with philanthropy is philanthropy comes to us with a solution and says, here's the money, go do it. And we're like, that's not working for us. Like we get to, you know, put a Band-Aid on it, sure, with, you know, here's a bag of food or here's, you know, rent for a couple of months. But if we do it together, we can solve the problem so we don't have to do this anymore. Right? We can solve the systemic problems so we don't have to go through this anymore, and we can move on to other things that are truly building wealth. It's just the way it has been done in the past through all of philanthropy's dominant, you know, wealth and research. They're coming to us to say, here, we already know the solution, you go do it. We're like, you know, that's not working. That has not worked. We are grateful that you want to do this with us, but as Andrea has outlined, and what Northwest Area Foundation and a few others have started to do, is let's figure out how to do this together and do this right so that it leads to systemic change.
We have several questions in the chat box. I'll start with the pretty easy and straightforward one that asks, how much has the fund raised to date?
$5.4 million.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. And then I'm going to read through all these and then I'll come back to them because we'll have some discussion. Can you tell us also about philanthropists within the Black community itself? Where do you see growth? Has there been a difference over the last couple of years? Any segment of Black philanthropists that is growing or changing most significantly? And then this audience member, thanks you very much for coming today. So, philanthropists within the Black community itself, where have you seen growth? And I would like to know if you have a hypothesis about why that is.
Go ahead and start, Andrea.
We know that over 43% of Black Washingtonians are living on some type or relying on some type of social services to make ends meet. But yet we know that the Black community has a level of generosity that's unmatched with others who have a lot of material wealth. And so I'd say that Black philanthropy has always been there. Now, the ability to give at the amounts compared to our white counterparts is growing. The idea Michelle talked about building bridges, there does need to be more relationship building within our Black community. One of the things as a result of ancestral trauma is that we are a fractured community because of the trance of scarcity of resources, because of the oppression over the years and the brutality and this need to take care of ourselves individually. But there is a softening towards the idea of being more in alignment, like there was in the 60s, where a Black activist on the streets worked with people of institutions like ours and worked with elected officials. And so what we're seeing more and more is that there's this cross-sector collaborative in our Black community. There are a lot more Black entrepreneurs. There are a lot more Black people in corporate America who understand where they came from, who understand in this way the shared experience that our Black people have had in the history of the United States, and want to sort of take action on that impulse they have to make change for generations to come. So there's been an awakening because there have been more Black people with access to opportunities and thereby looking back to be able to give back to communities. So you're seeing a convergence of all of those things happening.
Michelle, you
Yeah,
started to say something, and yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I have much more to add, but you know, nationally, I think you start to see and notice all of that, the Black wealth, the entrepreneurs and entertainers, and all of those that have accumulated this wealth that are now more intentional about where their investments go, and the voices that they choose to. That they are uplifting and raising their voices a lot more as well. Like what happened yesterday was amazing. The fact that all of our, many of our Black athletes chose to take a step off of the court or the field in the name of Jacob Blake, and was just life-changing. That was a paradigm shift that we witnessed last night. The fact that, you know, the players are now saying our voices matter, and they have matched that with their dollars. You know, for us, you know, we're grateful that Sierra and Russell used their voice to support our efforts, and many others. Robert Smith paid the debt of an entire graduating class 2 years in a row from historically Black colleges and universities. There is LeBron James is starting schools and paying off debts and ensuring that voters are registered and using their voices. So, I mean, there is a true shift happening where, yes, Black entrepreneurs, one, they're starting to exist more in number with technology and other things, and of course entertainment, but two, they are being more intentional about not only using their dollars, but their voice and their influence to enact change.
More questions. I'm gonna, here's one. How are you thinking about 501c3 status of potential grantees? And then goes on to explain, I know as a fundraiser, how much work, time, and resources nonprofit status requires, time and resources that are not spent on direct organizing. How are you thinking about what kinds of organizations will benefit from the fund?
There's a tension there, right, between having to build your capacity and the administrative functions and doing the work. And we do encourage any coalition, group, grassroots, formal, informal, if you want to be able to have your own agency by having your 501c3 designation, you should do that. It's important. We all have them. However, if you choose not to, you shouldn't have to either to have access to resources. So our fund is also changing the paradigm in that we will prioritize community organizations that are not necessarily 501c3 designations, that need fiscal sponsors and fiscal agents. We know that, again, they're on the ground doing the work. Our Black activists are on the ground doing the work right now, doing effective work that created a path for us to create this fund. And so we know that there are people out there who aren't credentialed, which is another, I think, facet that comes from university. And not that university is bad. I went to the Evergreen State College and got my undergrad and graduate degree. But I see how, you know, credentialing yourself by having a 501c3 designation, having a CFO, and your longevity in the community, if you don't have those things, you're not seen as credible. So we won't be minimizing it, but it's also not as important because we're going to be looking at the effectiveness of the solutions coming out of those organizations.
We need all of them to exist and be successful. So yeah, we're willing to help us all learn and grow together.
Fantastic. More questions, audience. Well, I personally am just beyond grateful that you took the time to come and share your experiences with us today. There's so much I have to learn, and I feel fairly confident that I can speak for most of the guests that we have online because I know them. And wow, thank you. I'm going to go away with a lot to think about. Still a few minutes for questions, and here comes one. What is the difference between philanthropy and social programs? Is there a connection, and could these two entities work together?
Well, I mean, I think that they have proximity. They don't always go hand in hand. Byrd Barr Place is a social program. We're an anti-poverty organization, again, created out of the Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty era, which being in a university setting, I should give credit to the Kennedy family because they authored the Economic Opportunity Act, not LBJ. He carried it forward in honor of JFK. But, you know, the United States was experiencing a really high rate of poverty back then in the 60s when this act passed. And what we saw was that this created the first community action of its kind in the history of the United States, where private entity, corporate entities came together with government and community to solve issues of poverty in our community. So there are a lot of our community service programs that are funded by government or private entity or not. Some of us are fee for service, we're not. And so you have certain philanthropic supports that go towards things that are not necessarily social programs, but then you do see them going towards social programs. You have social programs that are neatly tied with philanthropy, 100% funded by philanthropy, and you have others who are 100% funded by government. There are times where they go hand in hand, there are times where they don't, but we're an example of where they do. We're a public-private partnership. I hope that answers the question.
It does answer, so thank you for that. One more in the Q&A. My first time hearing about this Black Co-op Fund. Who is administering the funds? Is there a board of directors? Sorry, I may not be asking the right question. Is Seattle Foundation involved with administering the funds?
Yes, Seattle Foundation is housing the funds for us. We're doing a I do, we do, you do model, which is they're doing it. They're setting up the fund, managing it legally, taking care of all the compliance issues, because we are experts at being grantees, not necessarily philanthropists yet. And so we're learning from them. And then eventually there are portions of the fund that we will be managing more of. So we'll be doing it together. And in 3 years, the plan is to move it out of Seattle Foundation. So we're doing it on our own without them. They're helping us build capacity currently, which is exciting, that they're willing to not just house the funds, but also teach us and learn from us too, because they also want to shift the way they do giving. They understand that there have been some practices that got in the way and disadvantaged, again, communities like ours. So we're learning together.
Great. And speaking of capacity, the next question, you've had big success, it seems, with corporate gifts to launch at 5 million. Fantastic, great. Where are you seeing the donor base, parenthetically, individuals, to move toward the $25 million goal?
That's a great question. I don't know the percentage of how many we have individually versus corporate. But, you know, I'm a firm believer that, you know, it takes all of us. And I believe that individual donors is the future, you know. Even in our work, corporate donations can only get us so far, and individuals have to buy into it. And even those individuals within the corporations do employee matching and employee giving and volunteer time and all of that. So I think that we have to do more to leverage that, and we will as we continue to grow, because it's just necessary. You know, we always use the model of Barack Obama. You know, he became such a great fundraiser, not off of large gifts, but off of that, you know, $5, $10, $25 gift. And so that's important to us as well.
Thank you. And the last question, which I'm surprised is last, what does the application process look like to be considered for funding?
We're currently creating that. And again, it will be done with community input. So between now and the end of the year, the plan is to hear from the largest cross-section of our Black-led organizations across the state of Washington, We plan to begin granting early next year, and that process will be designed by and through community input. I mean, we really want to turn this thing on its head, Angela, and everyone else. Like,
I don't doubt it.
You know, we're strongly like, we're a Black people that, regardless of our past, like, we represent the promise of America. I know we've been the product of this dark, shadowy past, but with this fund, we feel like it's the way to forge forward, like to construct this future that offers us the same opportunities, right, for wealth, prosperity, and success, not just for some people, but not just dominant class, but for all Washingtonians. And hopefully it's a model for people across the United States. Like for us in terms of Black people, for over 400 years, the only way to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness in America was restricted by whites. And we want to change that for people of color and for Black people.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think on behalf of all of our guests, I have learned tremendously. I'm now exhausted, but that's okay. We have to be uncomfortable to grow, right? So I think you're probably going to be hearing from quite a few of our audience. And is there anything that you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. And we're in this journey together.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. You're getting thank yous in the chat box as well. Friends Online will be talking about development planning in September. Keep your eyes open for that. And thank you for joining us today. The recording and well, there really weren't slides, but the short deck that there was will be sent to you as soon as the recording is edited a little and ready to go. So happy Thursday. Happy Thursday. Black Lives Matter. Let's go.